Hi, welcome to the West, a Narrative History. I'm Christina Morgan, and this is Chapter 5, the Hellenistic Era and the Rise of Rome. Today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things that lead to the Roman Republic, but first we're going to show you the winged victory at Samothrace. This is the statue of the goddess Nike, so all those little shoes you have and that great stuff that we love to wear, this is where that symbol comes from, the goddess Nike. The Hellenistic era gets its name, or comes from this time after Sparta defeats Athens in the Peloponnesian War. There's a bunch of fighting, the Greek city-states, nobody really can take control. So they say, hey, maybe if we had a king or somebody, we'd get unity and peace. Philip II of Macedonia says, hey, I'm your guy. We can all get together. We can go beat up Persia because, they beat us up before. So let's go get some revenge. And everybody says, hey, that sounds great. He defeats Athens and Thebes anyway, and so they really have no choice. But before he can execute this plan of going to get revenge on Persia, he's killed, or he dies. Some say he's killed by his son, but in any event, he dies. And his son Alexander takes over. Alexander becomes called Alexander the Great. He's a man of strong-willed. He's very charismatic. He defeats the Persians within 4 years. He takes over this area. He sort of takes on a lot of Persian customs. This doesn't go over so well, but he blends the Persians, Macedonian, and Greeks all into this one empire, and it creates a new civilization. After he dies, the closest generals mark out territories, and they start fighting for like 300 years over who's going to be in charge, and that really, obviously doesn't go so well, but it doesn't really matter about that because it creates a culture that fuses all of these old cultures that were one, fuses them into something new, and we call that Hellenistic. Hellenistic civilization affirms the worth of the individual. It just like the Hellenic or Greek culture, it says you're worth something, each person, but now you're just a little bitty cog in a whole machine of an empire. Theater now stays away from politics, whereas before it's where everybody got their news. There's a new genre, the novel, that comes out. And now art and literature appeal to emotion, whereas before they appealed to intellect. Artists don't have the political freedom they used to. Now they're just trying to distract people from being bored. The philosophers turn toward what we call philosophies of life. Now we get the Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Cynicism tenets that we'll see lasting through the Roman times and even to today. There's a great library and museum at Alexandria where they systematize learning. They gather up all these great thinkers, inventors, teachers. They put them all in one place and they give them time to work and invent and learn and create. Unfortunately, all this great learning was destroyed. And so who knows where we'd be today if all of that had not been lost. The origin of Rome, we're going to move on to that. According to tradition, Rome was ruled by a bunch of kings for a few hundred years. And after they're overthrown, the people of Rome said no more kings. And this idea of no more kings is going to stick with them forever. It is very deeply ingrained in the people of Rome. There is a history of being connected to the Etruscans. So we're going to talk a second about the Etruscans. We aren't able to interpret the Etruscan language, so we don't know a lot about them. We do know their cities developed very quickly. They had good conditions. They were really the best gold and bronze workers. But we don't really know much more than that. We know the Romans copied many of their political symbols and customs, but most in religion. Romans occupy Latium and speak Latin, but again, they're influenced by the Etruscans in the north and the Greeks in the south. Rome becomes part of this larger Mediterranean world through the trade networks that cross Italy. The Roman Republic, in that, family was the most important in constructing who you are, how you were known. The pater familias, or the father of the family, had absolute authority. He could even order execution of family members. And the family, remember, would have included slaves, servants, anyone that worked in the household. That would all be under his jurisdiction. There's also this issue of a social class. So when you're in Rome, you're either born a plebeian or a commoner or a patrician, an elite. And that's just a matter of birth. But that doesn't mean you can't earn a lot of money no matter which class you're in. Or you can be poor and be noble, you can be rich and be common. That's just kind of based on how you accomplish in your life. So there becomes this argument between the rich people who are in the common class who feel like they should have privileges like the noble class does. And so there are things like the 12 tables and different things laws that become passed to try to help keep people from fighting and become civil wars and different things like that, because they're trying to keep order in society. There is this complex organization of office holding because they don't want any one individual to have too much power, because again, they have this no more kings philosophy. They limit terms to 1 year, they share power whenever possible. They have this idea of the Senate, which is very crucial in Roman politics, in the idea of the Romans. A Greek named Polybus says that the Romans were successful because they had a balance of powers. And that's important. They influenced even up to the United States, and balance of powers is one of our crucial ideas. However, the way it was designed, it wasn't sufficient for the city-state, much less the whole empire that they were trying to run. So this was a problem they needed to deal with. There were a lot of foreign entanglements that were causing stress. It was bringing in a lot of money, but it was just causing different problems in the economy. One of them was that there were a lot of slaves captured in war, and they brought them to work on these big plantations. But this was putting small farmers out of business and causing them to lose their land. And where are they supposed to go? Well, these brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, said, let's give all this extra public land that the wealthy have been buying up, let's redistribute to these poor farmers. Well, they're assassinated, so I guess that idea wasn't popular among somebody. Violence by the end of the late century is a permanent factor in elite politics, or politics among the upper class. And the upper class is divided into two camps: the populares, or the popular faction, and the optimates, or the ones who prefer the best people. But what ends up happening is generals control troops, and the one who has the best troops controls Rome. And that is what pretty much happens for a while. Whoever has the troops has Rome. There's a lot of political instability, violent conflicts, and there ends up being this three-man council called the Triumvirate that ends up ruling Rome. And I always say you can remember the Triumvirates by knowing there are two thugs and money. The two thugs in the first one are Caesar and Pompey. They're both generals. And then Crassus is the money. Okay? But this triumvirate collapses in the 50s when Crassus dies, and Pompey and Caesar are getting more and more estranged from each other. There's a civil war after Caesar defeats Pompey. And there's this issue in Egypt with Pompey and Cleopatra. And keep Cleopatra in your mind because she's going to be important later on. Here's a statue of Cleopatra. Caesar realized that the Republic couldn't govern an empire, and maybe he was making plans to create a monarchy of some sort. Maybe he was going to work with Cleopatra. We really don't know, because he was assassinated on the Ides of March by people who think they're going to reestablish a republic. He was actually killed by one of his own friends, but they thought they were doing the right thing. After he died, there's a new triumvirate formed between his grandnephew, who he adopted, Gaius Octavius, who will be known as both Octavian and Augustus. And this triumvirate is Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Octavian and Mark Antony are the thugs, Lepidus is the money. And they form a joint dictatorship. As Caesar's adopted son and heir, Octavian outmaneuvers the other two, and Mark Antony allies himself with Cleopatra, who becomes his lover, and Octavian uses that against her and says they're dangerous foreign schemers, and they use that against her. After all of that, Octavian stands by himself, the winner after all this civil conflict, with all these enormous resources at his disposal, realizing that they need a stable government. He creates what's called an invisible monarchy. Is he going to give Rome an actual monarchy after 500 years of them hating kings, or is he going to be more creative? So the questions are, is government of, by, and for the people necessarily the best system? What liberties are free people willing to sacrifice in order to achieve security? Are some prices too high to pay? Can a republic continue to function when the country becomes a global empire?